Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, March 26th, and we have a great show. Spring practice has started all around the country, so we have a couple of spring practice / kind of off-season questions, some grandiose things that I want to get into today, including can the SEC get back on top of the sport in 2025? Then we got to talk about some teams with the most to prove next season. Obviously, Penn State has a big-time target on their back. Going into 2025, a huge year for them, sort of a title or bust year. We'll get into that in that second segment. Definitely a lot of other teams that we'll get into probably going into next week, frankly. Then we'll do a little bit of a midweek catch-up. Obviously, the big stories around UGA, another couple of traffic incidences that happened in Athens, and we'll talk about that plenty in the last segment. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing. There's tons of stuff to get into. Obviously, if you would like to like and subscribe, would mean the world to me. Any questions or comments you have, please leave them in the comment section. I will absolutely include them in next week's show. If you want to follow me over on X or any of the Instagram apps, any of that type of stuff, it's Thomas_Brzee. Please feel free to follow on over there and interact with me all you want. Love talking college football, and we'll take any questions that you guys have. But let's go ahead and jump into some questions that I had, at least to start off the spring practice / kind of the off season that we're getting into. There's a lot of different things to kind of jump into, and I think one of the big ones that we're going to be watching for is which transfer quarterback makes the biggest effect? Which is the guy that really jumps off the page from spring, obviously going into fall? Who's the guy that kind of steals all the headlines? And there's a number of really good options. I think John Mateer kind of takes the cake. The Washington State quarterback from a year ago that found his way over to Oklahoma, over 4,000 yards a year ago, over 40 touchdowns, remarkably talented dual threat quarterback, and a guy that Oklahoma very badly needs. I don't think I need to tell any of you guys that Oklahoma had their fair share of issues on the offensive side of the ball, especially with that offensive line, and having this guy in your backfield makes that a little bit easier for that offensive line because he can make plenty of plays on his own. Now, I think the rest of Oklahoma will be plenty fine going into 2025, but this guy gives you a leg up. There's no doubt about that. And then you got guys like Carson Beck, and we'll have to wait until summer to see exactly what he looks like. We'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about Miami in the next segment. And then Thomas Castellanos down at Florida State, kind of comparing himself to Jameis Winston already, so a little bit aggressive, but at the end of the day, love the confidence there. And then Fernando Mendoza is a really interesting guy coming over from Cal, going to Bloomington to join Indiana, and Curt Cignetti, going to be really interesting to see what he can do. Obviously, Indiana, they want to get back to the CFP. That's where they want to be going forward, and he's going to have to be the guy that leads them there this time around. And then you got Connor Wegman down at Houston, Miller Moss at Louisville, which is a very interesting team, and definitely a team that could find their way back right into the CFP conversation next year. And then Darian Menso, we all know the price tag that he took to go from Tulane to Duke, and that's going to put a lot of expectations on his back. There's no doubt about that. So that'll be a fascinating thing to watch. Obviously something that we will unpack as spring goes on, but for me, John Mateer kind of takes the cake among these transfer quarterbacks. But another thing, new hires are a thing that we're going to have to be watching for, and obviously a lot of those eyes are going to go to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Obviously everyone's going to be watching what Bill Belichick is doing, how he's going about his business. Already has gotten a couple of huge visits. I saw that Larry Fitzgerald's son was going to go to UNC here pretty soon for a visit, so that'll be a very interesting thing to watch. Obviously, the expectations will be really interesting. I'm not sure exactly what UNC fans are thinking. If you're a UNC fan, please let me know what you're thinking this season's going to look like in the comments. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a really fascinating hire, obviously. Very fascinating job, and one that could really blow up over the next couple of years, but got to hit the ground running pretty quickly because decisions and opinions will be made pretty quickly on this guy. I can promise you that. Then you do have Rich Rod over at West Virginia. Cannot wait to see what's going on there. He has already banned TikTok dances for his players, so he's doing a little bit to get them in line just a little bit more. But overall, a fascinating story. Definitely one that brings a lot of West Virginia fans a lot of happiness. There's no doubt about that, but you got to find a way to win on the field. And I think Nico Miracle is a really fun quarterback and definitely a guy that could really be a huge asset. They got Jalen Henderson coming over from Texas A&M. There's going to be a lot of interesting things to watch over there in Morgantown. Then you got Barry Odom at Purdue, Scott Frost making his return to UCF, and a ton of shifting in the group of five that will be really fascinating and could be a new hire that finds their way to the CFP. If I was to bet on one guy in particular, I think I'd have to bet on one of the group of five guys. If I'm being totally honest, these Power 5 teams, while I think the head coaching hires were very solid and will be really interesting to watch over the next couple of years, not super hopeful for these teams in 2025, at least when it comes to the CFP world. But on that G5 level, feels like there's some coaches to really watch there. Blake Harrell over at ECU is a very, very interesting one that I like a lot. But moving forward to the freshmen, we're kind of doing all the new guys around here, but the freshman quarterbacks, will they live up to the hype? And it mainly starts with Bryce Underwood. He is the show. Everyone understands that. The number one quarterback coming out of high school, and the guy that got paid $12 million to find his way to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Remarkably talented kid. Sky high expectations. I think everyone expects him to start. I expect him to start, frankly, and if he doesn't, I think that would be a huge upset for Mikey Keene and would be great for Michigan. You know, Mikey Keene's a plenty good quarterback, but this is the guy that everyone wants to see. Number 19 is the guy that everyone wants to watch, and I tend to believe that you're going to be able to get that wish. Then you do have Julian Lewis, a really fun guy over there in Boulder that is fighting for that position with Caden Salter, very talented quarterback from Liberty. That'll be an interesting battle. I don't think Julian Sain will win that one. We talked about that one last week, so if you want to go look at my quarterback battle segment, please do so. And then Julian Lewis, Hussein Longstreet over at USC is someone I talked about him on my blog earlier. And then my dark horse is Matt Zollers. He's over at Missouri, and Bo Pribula obviously came in from Penn State and kind of that crazy incident that happened during the playoff, but Matt Zollers, very, very talented, very, very strong arm, and definitely a guy that could come on really strong during the spring and maybe be the story coming out of Columbia, Missouri after this spring camp. The big question on everyone's mind is, can the SEC find their way back to the top of the sport in 2025? And I think it relies on a couple of things. The way I look at it right now, if I'm looking at these two conferences next to each other, the SEC and the Big Ten, I'd lean slightly towards the Big Ten going into 2025. I think you have to feel great about what Penn State is getting back. You have to feel great about Oregon being who Oregon is over the last couple of years. Ohio State obviously is going to be Ohio State. Michigan bringing in more talented guys on the outside and that quarterback. There's a lot to like about what the Big Ten has to offer, and that doesn't even include Indiana, Illinois, maybe Nebraska, Wisconsin making some type of run. So a very, very talented group over in the Big Ten. For the SEC, it comes down to the quarterbacks. There's no two ways about that. Now, Diego Pavia is kind of off in his own corner, being the very veteran guy among these really talented quarterbacks, but DJ Lagway going into his first full season starting. Arch Manning, the exact same thing. And then you have guys like Nico Iamaleava going into his second year starting, but not the most experienced guy in the world. It's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. And I think Florida is a team to really watch here, because if Florida can make the jump from 7-5 to 9-3, 10-2, whatever that looks like to get in the CFP conversation, I think the SEC is going to be really strong. You're going to have a Georgia team that will be a little bit up in the air, and I think there's a solid argument to say that maybe the SEC will just eat each other alive once again, but if Arch Manning hits the way that people think he will over in Austin, Texas, if DJ Lagway is the guy that he showed in flashes down there in Gainesville, if Gunnar Stockton can really get it going, and then Iamaleava, Sellers, all of these guys, Jackson Arnold's a very fascinating figure, and then whoever is starting down there in Tuscaloosa, all those guys are going to be hugely important, and that's where I see kind of the separation between these two conferences. Now, plenty of talented quarterbacks up in the Big Ten. Obviously, Drew Aller, obviously Julian Sain and Dante Moore getting their first chance to start, but when you look down at the SEC, there's guys all across that conference that I really think can elevate that group. Right now, I lean a little bit towards the Big Ten. You know, they've won the last two titles, and it seems like Michigan's going to get a little bit better. Nebraska's going to get a little bit better. Illinois might get a lot of bit better, so that'll be a fascinating thing to watch. But the SEC has plenty going for it. There's no doubt about that. That quarterback position might be the chief among them, and I think these guys are going to be hugely important to what the SEC is this year and obviously going forward into 2026. And then we got to find the sleepers. We got to find a way to find the teams that are hiding right under the surface in Indiana, if you will, of this year, and find that team that's really going to explode in 2025. We'll start in the SEC. Auburn is the team that I'm watching, that I think everyone's watching, frankly, and Auburn is a very, very confounding team. They're very confusing. They were in 2024. They played really good football. I believe they were top 60 in total offense and total defense, and then they would just give games away. They would turn over the ball way too often. Jackson Arnold comes in with his own turnover issues. Very talented quarterback. I do think they upgraded at that position, but the turnover issues are still very much there, and you'll have to see if you can avoid that kind of time bomb that happened at a number of end of games, like that Oklahoma game. Should have been a win for Auburn, but they gave that one away to Oklahoma, and it really kind of torpedoed a season that could have been really, really good, and they could have been very excited about 2025. I think they're a little bit wary, but I really like the talent on this team. Bringing in a guy like Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech is a huge, huge boost to this offense. And then when you have a guy like Cam Coleman, you can do a lot of really special things. A very talented sophomore wide receiver that might just be one of the best in the entire country. Then over to the Big Ten, Washington is awesome. I cannot wait to see what the Huskies can do this year. Damon Williams Jr. is the guy that I might like the most in the entire country. He is so much fun to watch. Not saying he's the best quarterback in the country, but he is going to be really, really fun to watch. Denzel Boston, Omari Evans, a couple other guys on the outside. This is a very interesting team. We saw what Jedd Fisch was able to do down there at Arizona when he had the quarterback in place in Noah Fafita. This is a very talented kid, and definitely a guy that, if things fall the right way for Washington, it could be a really, really dangerous team, and then maybe find their way right back into the CFP after a one-year hiatus. Down in the Big 12, got to go to Lubbock, Texas. This is a very, very fun team that Joey McGuire is building, I believe, in his fourth year. Could be a little bit off there, but I think Barron Morton is a dude that really could hit his stride going into 2025. And when you look across those lines of scrimmage, they're a lot bigger than a lot of the other Big 12 teams, and a lot of that has to do with the portal guys they brought in Romello Height from Georgia Tech, brought in Lee Hunter from UCF, both really, really talented kids, and just really big, really huge humans, and definitely a thing that in the Big 12, when you got big guys, you have a huge advantage over some other teams that might not quite be quite as big, and definitely will be an interesting thing to watch. But I think Texas Tech is that team that you're going to be circling, and maybe will take that role of maybe Arizona State, while Arizona State takes the role of the team leading the conference going into next year. And then over in the ACC, it's an easy choice for me. It's Georgia Tech. I think if you're not watching the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets going into next year, you're doing yourself a disservice. Haynes King comes back for his sixth year in college football. Very talented quarterback. They have guys on the outside like Malik Rutherford, brought in Eric Rivers over from FIU. Very talented, over 1,000 yards a year ago. And then Jamal Haynes in that backfield, along with a defense that will get a new defensive coordinator, so that'll be a really interesting thing to watch. But plenty of talented guys in that group, plenty of guys coming back in that group. So we'll be a really interesting team, and that game in week 3 against Clemson, they win that one, this could very well be the team that you find in Charlotte at the very end of the year. And then we'll talk about the national champions just for 1 second. Will it be another reload for Ohio State, or would this year just be a little bit different? When you look at all the guys walking out the door to the NFL, it's hard to imagine that this team wouldn't take a little bit of a step back. I think the big thing is multiple starting offensive linemen on an offensive line that already had its fair share of issues. You know, you lose Josh Simon, you lose Donovan Jackson, very, very talented guys on two sides of your offensive line, and one guy that was your starting left guard had to kick out to left tackle and was incredible at that position. But then you add in Will Howard, you add in both Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, and Emeka Egbuka, all of these guys on defense. It's going to be really tough to reload this thing. All that being said, I think they will reload just fine. And the reality of it is, I think they have the best offensive player in the country in Jeremiah Smith. I think they have the best defensive player in the country in Caleb Downs. And then when you have Sonny Styles coming back, Davison Igbinosun, and then you have Kenyatta Jackson. Devin Sanchez coming in as a freshman is a very interesting guy to watch. But overall, they can reload as much as they want when it comes to a talent perspective. Julian Sayin is going to make this thing go. Julian Sayin is the guy that you're going to want to watch. He is the biggest piece to all of this. He will be the starter there. I'd be very, very surprised if Lincoln Kineholtz or Tavian St. Clair came in there and won that job. I think it will be Julian Sayin. He's got to step up to the plate. He's got to be a huge leader for this team, and if he can't do that, then maybe it is a little bit of a different year for Ohio State in 2025. Maybe they lose their 5th game in a row to Michigan. They might have already lost 5 in a row. Now I'm losing track of how long it's been since they've been able to beat that team up north. But overall, very, very talented team going into next year, even losing all those guys to the NFL. But if that quarterback doesn't hit the way that they think he will hit, it's going to be a problem. Now, I'm not super worried about that. I think Ohio State will be more than fine. I think you will find them in the CFP going into next year, but there is definitely a couple of questions there and a little bit more rebuilding that needs to be done than maybe some past years over there in Columbus. But a lot of different questions that we will get to probably over the next couple of weeks. Continue to kind of brain dump on this. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments and I will absolutely include them in next week's show. But overall, those are a couple of questions I'm really circling. But let's take our first break. Let's take a little break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the teams with the most to prove. Obviously, it will have a lot to do with the questions that we just asked, but overall, a couple of teams that I think might be in kind of title or bust type years, or at least getting very close to a title. And then you have a couple of teams that just want to get back up to the top. And we'll talk about them right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got into a couple of questions that we're watching as we head into spring, head into summer, and then obviously into fall camp. A lot of different things to watch. Some transfer quarterbacks that just have to be huge, including John Mateer over at Oklahoma. Some sleepers that I'm watching very closely. Washington may be the chief among them, and a couple of guys over there in Columbus that just got to step up huge with all those guys going off to the NFL. But moving right along here, we got some teams to watch. Some teams that are really, really pressure-filled as they head into 2025, maybe because they had some tough years in 2024, maybe because they seem to be all systems go for a national title in 2025. And I think when you talk about this, you got to start with the team in State College. I think when you talk about teams that are under the most pressure going into 2025, Penn State's probably number one. When you talk about returning Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, returning a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and then you got the quarterback, where a lot of teams around the country, you'll look at Texas, you'll look at Georgia, you'll look at Ohio State, you'll look at Oregon, all of them are introducing new quarterbacks to their system. Penn State is not. A very, very talented kid that, yes, did have some tough moments in the last couple of years, but obviously understands the offense very, very well, and it will be a really, really incredible thing for them to have their guy very much set. Now, all of this being said, I think James Franklin has the best roster and the best staff that he's ever had, in my opinion. When you add a guy like Jim Knowles, when you add some of the pieces they have to the wide receiver room, and Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross, who just have to hit throughout spring, and definitely another thing to watch there. But overall, when you go into 2025, I don't think you can just win one game. I don't think you can just beat Ohio State. I don't think you can just beat Oregon. I don't think you can just win the Big Ten. I think you got to do some more damage. I don't think you can just beat Iowa State, let's say, in the Cotton Bowl just to lose to Texas in the Rose Bowl in the semifinal. Just a hypothetical there. But overall, you got to win multiple games. You got to show that you're not only making a step forward, but multiple steps forward, because this team is talented enough. They have the quarterback, they have the coordinators, they have so many things in place that could really make them successful that if they don't hit in 2025, I don't know how long it's going to be until they have a better shot. Now, Penn State's always going to be talented. It's not to say that if they don't win a title this year, they won't win for the next 50, but it is to say this is a very, very talented team, a very talented coaching staff, and you miss out on 2025, it might be a while before you get that really, really good shot again. Oh, excuse me, 2 seconds here. There we are. It's staying in the Big Ten. You got to go back to Michigan. I think this is a team that had a setback a year ago and overall didn't do anything too terrible. You know, it had a tough year, obviously lost a ton of players, so was bound to happen. A ton of coaches left, a ton of off-the-field stuff that we can talk about on another date, but overall, they had a ton of things happen. They're also losing a ton of guys on defense when you talk about Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on the interior, two elite running backs with Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, and they're breaking in a freshman quarterback. Probably breaking in a freshman quarterback with Bryce Underwood. There will be a lot of pressure for this team, and they go to Norman in week 2, so they'll get a chance to deal with John Mateer and the Sooners in week 2, and we'll see what they can do. They go to Lincoln in week 4, and that'll be a really interesting one, but they avoid Penn State. They avoid Oregon, Illinois, and Indiana. They have the ability to be in the CFP conversation. Now, you're putting a lot on the shoulders of a freshman, there's no doubt about that, but Michigan wants to be in national title conversations, and Sharon Moore's made that very clear by the way he speaks and the way he's recruited on the trail, has done an incredible job. It's time to get back up to the top, and I think it's going to be a freshman quarterback that probably has to lead you there, but very talented kid. I think this team has everything in front of them, and very navigable schedule to get this thing going with Bryce Underwood at quarterback. Texas is always going to be under pressure. That's never going to not be the case going forward, especially now that Steve Sarkisian has shown what they can do, and that is win a national title. Only a couple of plays away from being in that national title game with Notre Dame this year. The year before that, almost played Michigan for that national title in 2023, but the reality is, I do think this is the next team that you look at and said, who's going to win the next national title? Who's going to be the next coach to win the national title? I think a lot of people look towards Steve Sarkisian in Texas. I think a lot of people look up towards Dan Lanning, and we'll talk about him plenty throughout the next couple of weeks, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in 2025 because I think 2024 was a remarkable rebuilding job. You had 11 guys drafted in the NFL, 2 guys on the interior of that defensive line that were downright incredible for you. The reality is you're probably going to have to do even more of that this year. You have two remarkable wide receivers leaving you, even more than that, remarkable wide receivers, Gunnar Helm leaving at tight end, and then obviously Quinn Ewers, a huge piece for this team over the last couple of years on and off the field. Arch Manning will be taking over, and it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. He's going to have to be able to get this thing rolling in. I think this is the year where Texas really proves that they're not going anywhere. I think 2024 was a great indicator of how good this team can be, how greatly they can replace talent, but you still had your quarterback. You still had some big-time pieces that Jahdae Barron on the defensive side of the ball was massive for that team throughout the last year. Can you replace it again? Can you do it one more time around and do a little bit more replacing than you had to do a year ago? It'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Obviously, Arch Manning will have as much pressure as just about any first-year starting quarterback has ever had, but Texas is going to be right there with them, and they're going to have to be at least in the national title conversation, get back to the CFP, and then maybe 2026 is the national title year, but I think you got to show that you're not going anywhere, that you will be in the CFP conversation pretty much regardless of how many guys get drafted to the next level. The team they lost to in the SEC Championship, Georgia, just has to get right in 2025. Georgia was not classic Georgia in 2024. They had execution issues. The run game was mediocre at best, inconsistencies all the time. They dropped the ball as much as anyone in the entire country. They brought in some reinforcements at that wide receiver position, bringing in Zachariah Branch, bringing in Noah Thomas, two remarkably talented guys and two very different players, which really helps what Georgia does. I think Zachariah Branch can bring a little bit element to this offense that just hasn't been there in the past. A little bit more of that gadget type thing that I think Glad McConkey was incredible at, that they even used Brock Bowers for a couple of times. I think Zachariah Branch brings that back to Athens just a little bit. The reality is you got to get back in the run game. You got to get that going in the right direction, especially with Gunnar Stockton going start to finish throughout this year. At least I assume it will be Gunnar Stockton. You got to help him out with the run game. He will help you out in the run game, of course, but at the end of the day, this is a team that wants to be setting the pace in the SEC and nationally. It's going to be a huge pressure-filled season, and we'll talk about the off-the-field issues that don't help that one bit. So we'll talk about that in the next segment, but this is obviously a pressure-filled team, and if they don't bounce back in the ways that we know Georgia to be, it might be a little bit of time to worry going forward in Athens. Then you got Miami, the team that Carson Beck found his way down to, and there are some off-the-field things that we will not address on here, I'll be totally honest, but it'll be a very interesting thing to watch throughout spring. This team in general, Carson Beck will come back into the mix. He will play good football. I can't promise that he's going to play great football. Last year was obviously very up and down for him, but he's going to be a talented guy. The defense is an issue. The defense was a huge issue last year. It was the real only reason that they weren't in the CFP, that they weren't maybe even competing for a national title, much like that LSU team in 2023. But Corey Heatherman comes in from Minnesota, very talented coordinator, definitely a guy that can get the boys going, and the talent level will obviously be a little bit higher down in Coral Gables than it was up there in Minnesota, but they should be in the ACC title race. They should be playing for a CFP spot. They probably should have been doing that this past year. Now, they were in that conversation, obviously deep into the season, but let that kind of slip away very quickly against Syracuse. They got to get that defense figured out. And then you got to replace guys like Xavier Restrepo, Isaiah Horton, all those guys on the outside with guys like JoJo Trader, Nye Carr, and it'll be really interesting to watch. On top of all of that, if Carson Beck isn't fully all the way ready, Emory Williams better be ready to roll, and that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch throughout spring. But Miami's got to deliver. If they don't deliver in 2025, I think a lot of people down in Coral Gables will be doubting if Mario Cristobal can ever break through down there. Then you got Clemson. Clemson is a team that I would put probably right behind Penn State when you talk about a run-it-back category, a team that's getting back a lot of real talent that maybe forego the draft, maybe didn't, but overall, Clemson's getting back a lot of veteran talent. Obviously, Cade Klubnik at quarterback, the two wide receivers that are not quote-unquote veteran talent, but Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore are just beasts that are going into their sophomore season. Antonio Williams is a huge piece to this, obviously, and then on defense, you got Sammy Brown, that was the name I was looking for. Very talented get out there. Ashton Hampton on the back end is incredible. Avion Terrell as well. So they got plenty of talent. They hired two coordinators from outside their comfort zone. Definitely not something that Dabo's been known to do. They picked up a couple of portal guys. they're getting a little different down there in Clemson, South Carolina, and at some point they're going to have to hit. I think this year is about as good of an opening as you're possibly going to have. Now, the ACC around them is going to be plenty talented, and it will be plenty of teams like Louisville, like Georgia Tech, like SMU, like Miami that will be trying to knock them off that pedestal, obviously, but when you have Cade Klubnik, when you have those wide receivers on the outside, and when you have a run game that I think is going to be really, really good with Jay Haynes kind of leading the way there, I think this team should be firmly in the CFP. And I think if they're not, then the concerns about Dabo will get very, very loud once again, as they have pretty much around this time every year, but this past one, really. And then Alabama. You got to find your way back up to the top. I know Kalen DeBoer had a very interesting year in his first year, and I think a lot of that was kind of out of his control in some different ways. I think Jalen Milroe, they were remarkably reliant on his ability. He had to make just about every play, and the reality was, you're not benching Jalen Milroe. You're not doing that on that team, because we saw how that team reacted when they played USF a couple of years back. Was not good without Jalen Milroe at quarterback. He is the outright leader of that team, and you just have to have him on the field. That being said, you move forward without Jalen Milroe now, and you got to find the right guy. I think there's a lot of different people that say Ty Simpson will be the quarterback. I know Austin Mack is making a huge impression throughout spring camp thus far, and then Keelan Russell is coming in as a very talented freshman. Broke down that one as well, gave my pick for who I think is going to win that one. Maybe not the person that you're expecting, but overall, go check that out if you would like to. But overall, I think this is a really good team. This is a very talented team. They have plenty of guys coming back on the defensive side of the ball. Deontay Lawson will still be holding it down in the center of that defense. They will have the ability to get back to the CFP, and if they don't, the sky might just be falling in Tuscaloosa. Now, I don't want to say that Kalen DeBoer is coaching for his job next year, because I think 9-3, I think he's fine. I think they move forward to 2026 feeling okay, at least, about where they're heading to, but there's a reality here where if Alabama doesn't hit, then those fans get antsy in a hurry. I'm just saying it very honestly, and the reality is I think Kalen DeBoer will get them back to that level, but there's a lot of teams in the SEC that would love to see them stay at that 9-3, maybe even a little bit worse of a record going into 2025. And this is one of those teams. LSU is the last team I have on here in in terms of pressure-filled teams, and they were Miami in 2023. Jaden Daniels, 2 elite receivers, wasted with a terrible defense. That was the reality of the 2023 season. Made the change at coordinator, brought in Blake Baker from Missouri, and got better throughout 2024. Did a lot of really, really nice things, especially in that back end. A lot of guys played a little bit more a little bit better than they had early on in the year. But it wasn't enough. They're going to have to find a way to get a little bit more out of that defensive side of the ball. Now, bringing in guys like Jack Pryburn, like Patrick Payton, like all of the guys they brought on in the back end, like Jakeem Jackson and a number of other players, they're going to be very talented. There's no doubt about that. Garrett Nussmeier, Aaron Anderson, and a ton of other guys coming back. Harold Perkins finding his way back to Baton Rouge. This is a huge opportunity for LSU. If they do not make a CFP run in 2025, if they are not one of the 12 teams in the CFP, I think Brian Kelly's in trouble. I'll be totally honest. I don't think you can have a quarterback like Garrett Nussmeier, have the weapons that he's going to have in Barry and Brown coming in from Kentucky, and Nick Anderson coming in from Oklahoma, and so many other guys that are going to be incredible players. You got to find a way to the CFP. That should be the expectation for this team. I think a lot of fans expect that, and they very well should. And if they don't get there, I think Brian Kelly's got to be a little bit nervous when he's walking around Baton Rouge, because I don't necessarily think his job is super safe if they don't make a CFP run in 2025. But a lot of those teams will have plenty to say about what goes on in 2025, and it'll be really interesting to watch all of these teams. One of those teams I just named will fall on their face. We've shown that over the last couple of years. It happens in the portal era where maybe you lean a little bit too much on it and it gets a little bit hairy, like it happened with Florida State last year. Maybe there's one of those teams in that group. Maybe there will be in the next slate of groups that I put out there. But overall, there's going to be a lot of teams that are super pressure-filled. I think when you talk about a certain player, Arch Manning over there in Austin has to bear a lot of that weight, but Miami's got to get back up to the top. LSU's got to find a way to get to the CFP, and so many other guys that might be in a little bit of trouble when it comes to job security if they don't find a way to the top of the sport in 2025. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's just catch up on all the headlines that we didn't have a chance to get to or just haven't had a chance to talk about throughout the last couple of days. We'll obviously start with UGA. We'll get into Troy Taylor being let go by Stanford. We'll talk about some of the spring game stuff and a couple other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down pressure-filled teams that are staring down a massive year. I think you got to start with Penn State. That's going to be the team you're going to want to watch very closely. Obviously, a lot of guys coming back, a very talented staff they're bringing in. Got to execute now. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch, and we will obviously unpack that as spring goes on, but we got to do a little bit of a midweek catch-up. There's a lot of different things that have happened around the college football world. I have three here that I really want to zero in on, and we'll talk about this one first. We'll talk about the stuff that is going on over at UGA, and it's what's been going on at UGA for quite some time. Nitro Tuggle was arrested Thursday morning on charges of reckless driving and speeding. He was released from jail about 2:55 a.m. with a $26 bond. Very small bond, there's no doubt about that, but very obviously something that has been happening in Georgia for quite some time. I believe there's 25 different incidents since 2023. 20 different people, I believe, have been involved in these incidences, and another one happened early last week, I believe late last week, and it was Marquise Easley, a offensive lineman that mainly rode the bench last year, very talented young kid. He actually crashed into the Athens Bridge Apartments. If you saw that picture, it was tough. There's no doubt about that. Both those players have been suspended indefinitely as they kind of get an idea of what is going on here, how to handle those two situations, and we'll see what happens there. I think Marquise Easley might be in a little bit of trouble here. I'll be totally honest. I don't know all the details there, but obviously something that is quite serious. There's no doubt about that. I've talked about this a lot. I've talked about this, and everyone around the sport has talked about this probably more than we should have, if I'm being totally honest, because Georgia should have this figured out one way or the other. There's no doubt about that. But there's a couple of different things that I want to talk about here. First of all, this does fall on Kirby Smart. That's the reality of every football program around the country. If your players are acting out, you are the one that's going to get the brunt of that hate, the brunt of that reaction. Whatever that is, you are going to be the guy that is the poster child for that, no matter what. And Kirby Smart fully understands that. Obviously, after all of these incidents have happened, he understands that fully. There's no doubt about that. There's a couple of different things that have been said online that I do push back on, and I don't want to act like I am holding water for UGA. I don't want to act like I am, doing anything that looks like I'm trying to dismiss this in any way, because it's a very serious issue. If they do not get it figured out, then this Georgia team that should be the envy of college football will continue to get laughed at by just about everyone else. But there's a couple of different things. A lot of people are saying, when is Kirby Smart going to do something? And I've never understood that sentiment. Now, I'm not saying that I know every single happening that has gone on around UGA football. I do know a couple of people that know quite a few things that have gone on around there. The reality is he has brought in people to speak to them about safe driving pretty consistently. These guys have taken courses on defensive driving over the last couple of years. Obviously, after that terrible tragedy that happened in January of 2023, where a recruiting staffer as well as a player passed away in a traffic-related incident. So this is obviously a huge thing for this program. Kirby Smart has brought people in to speak. He has had these guys take courses. He has suspended guys, including these two that have gotten in trouble, and he's kicked guys off the team altogether. He has done a lot of different things. Now, I'm not saying that he's done everything. I'm not saying that he's done a perfect job. Obviously, if he had, this wouldn't be an issue anymore. This would not be something that they're dealing with. But the reality is, if you are going to be someone that says Kirby Smart has to do something, when is Kirby Smart going to step up? When is he going to be an example for his team? Tell me what Kirby Smart has not done that you would like him to do. And there's a couple of different ideas out there. Obviously, you can say he has to kick guys off the team the second they get in trouble for something. I just don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's a thing that any coach around the country would do. I don't think that's a thing that a lot of us would do if we were in the position of Kirby Smart. So that's something that you can have that take if you'd like to. I'd be shocked if you were someone that would go into that room and actually make that decision. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change the result. He's done a lot of different things to try to curb these problems, to try to make sure that they go away. It doesn't change the result, which is more arrests, which is more people getting in trouble for the same exact issues, more people shining a light on UGA for bad things rather than how great of a football program they are, and Kirby Smart being looked at in a lot of different ways. So I wish I had the answer. I wish I had a perfect wand that I could wave over Athens, Georgia, and all these guys would get in line very quickly. I know Kirby Smart wishes he had the answer as well, and I think a lot of you, if you walked into that room and saw all the things he did, I think you'd be very convinced that he's done just about everything he can do. Now, there might be a couple other things that can be turned over, and I think the players have to play a huge role in that, but overall, it's an issue. Plain and simple. Arrests keep happening at UGA, and a team that probably should be looked at around college football as the pinnacle of the sport, and everyone trying to strive to be what UGA is, they're kind of laughed at by a lot of different teams. They're kind of laughed at by fans, and a lot of teams don't want to be Georgia because of this issue. Kirby Smart's got to figure it out. Whether or not he's done all of the things that he can do or not, the thing's still happening. That's the reality. The result is the result, and you're going to have to find a way to move forward, and you're going to have to find a way to deal with this one way or the other. I can't say that it's going to be easy. I can't even say that it's going to happen all that soon, but it's got to happen. And if it doesn't, then at some point, Kirby Smart will be let go. The other thing that I want to touch on here just for half a second is a lot of people saying, well, if they win 10 or 11 games per year, the fans won't care. I went to UGA. I very much care. I'll be totally honest with you. I lived in Athens, Georgia for about 5 years of my life. I care a lot. I care that they're putting other people in danger. I care that this team is being looked at the way that they probably shouldn't be. I very much care that this is happening at UGA. I know that Kirby Smart cares. I understand that this is still a problem, and I understand that Kirby Smart's going to get the brunt of that. But the reality is the idea that we as fans, or not speaking for all the fans out there, but me personally, I very much care. I would very much like for this not to happen, and I'd very much like for these players to get punished when it does happen. So both those guys are suspended. We'll see what happens with these two cases, but the problem in UGA has happened for way too long. It's happened way too many times, and they got to find a way to get a solution out there, or at some point, Kirby Smart's going to be in a lot more trouble than he is right now. Moving forward to Stanford. Stanford has let go Troy Taylor, their coach, after a week after kind of revealed university investigations that found he mistreated female staffers. Apparently, he had talked down to them, was very demeaning in different ways, and 20 former and current female staffers were cooperated with investigators, kind of discussed with them what had happened. He said he had inappropriate discriminatory behavior based on sex, and this person decided to remove herself from her assigned duties. A lot of different things have kind of unfolded over there at Stanford over the last little bit, and he has been let go. He's gone 6-18 over his 2 seasons after coming over from Sacramento State. This is someone that, frankly, probably shouldn't be in college sports. If this stuff is true, which you don't fire a guy going into spring football if this stuff is not real, I'm going to be plainly honest about that, he should not be in college football. He should not be in college sports. He probably shouldn't be a coach in sports. I'll just be plainly honest about it. But at the end of the day, if all of this is true, he obviously has been let go. They will move forward into next year with an interim head coach and then try to see who's going to be the next guy. The one very interesting part of this that I do want to unpack here for a second, Troy Taylor, I'm not going to waste too much time on you. I'll be totally honest with you. I don't think you're really worth my time. But one of the very interesting things in this case is Andrew Luck is the person that fired him, who is the GM for the Stanford football team. That is a very interesting precedent to set. I did not think that that was going to be a thing that could ever happen around any university, really. Now, it's different in every university. Obviously, Andrew Luck's a little bit different over there in Palo Alto than just about everywhere else, anywhere else. So the reality is, it totally makes sense that Andrew Luck has the ability to do this. And I'm sure he worked with the AD. I'm sure he worked with the president. I'm sure it was a collaborative effort. But it was Andrew Luck pulling the trigger. It was Andrew Luck, the GM of this team, that was the one that actually fired the head coach. That's going to be an interesting thing to watch. I don't know if it's going to happen across the country. I think a lot of GMs are technically below the coach when it comes to the power structure in these college football programs, but it'll be an interesting thing to watch. Maybe these GMs have a little bit more power than we were thinking, and maybe they do have the power to let go some of these coaches. That'll be a fascinating thing to watch, but overall, I'll be totally honest, fairly happy that Troy Taylor is not in college football anymore, fairly happy that he's not in college sports. If you're going to treat people that way, then you probably shouldn't be. So they move forward. We'll see what happens in 2025, and then they got to find a coach, and they got to find a guy that will stick around for quite a while, because Stanford has been down for much longer than Stanford should probably be down. And then finally, let's talk about some spring games. Let's just get into this for just a little bit. Colorado and Syracuse have filed paperwork to the NCAA requesting the ability to hold spring practices and a spring game together in April. This is something that has gone around just a little bit. Deion said, I want to play someone else. That's what I want to do going forward. And Fran Brown stepped up to the plate. He said, tell me what time to be there, and I will be there to play you guys. So this is an awesome idea. It's something that I very much want to happen. I think Syracuse is a very, very talented team. I think Colorado is a very interesting team going into next year. And if we could have them play in spring ball, I'd be there to watch. There's no doubt about that. I would love to see what these two coaches have going into spring, but this is something that's going to be a little bit tough, at least in this year. Now, I'm very in on this idea. I very much want two teams to be playing each other now. I do have a little bit of different idea. I do think it would be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more worth the while for both teams if it was a Power 5 against Group of 5 team, or maybe a smaller team in your state, let's say, that you can play. Make it a little bit better for them financially, make it a little bit better for you where your players don't get injured. There's no craziness that happens when you're playing a good team like Syracuse or something like that. So that's the small tweak that I would make, but at the end of the day, if I can see these two teams go at it during spring, I'm going to tune in. There's no doubt about that. I'd love to see these teams go at it. I'd love to see some type of preseason, some type of spring games where you can really see what your team is made of. Because as we all know, getting into spring football, it's a zero-sum game. You don't know if the offensive line is incredible or the defensive line isn't all that great, or the wide receivers are awesome or your back end's not all that great, and that's definitely an issue. Going into the first week of the season, you don't really know who you are, at least yet. So that'll be a really interesting thing to happen. I don't think it'll happen this year. I think it'll take a little bit longer to get all the ducks in a row and make sure that everyone's kind of following all the right protocols, but I love the idea. I think it's going to be a really, really awesome one. And another one that popped up, Mike Gundy said that he'd be more than happy to play Oklahoma during spring. Play that one during the year. What are we doing? That one has to be played during the year. Give me Bedlam back, because the reality is so many teams in the SEC play that out-of-conference game. Georgia Tech play, Florida State. There's no reason that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State cannot get on the field during the season. If we have to buy time just a little bit and they play in the spring for the time being, I'll live with that. But right now, get them to play in the regular season. I don't need a spring game from these two. But overall, love the idea. I think two teams getting on the field, understanding where they're standing going into the next year. And I think these, it would just make for some really great matchups. And maybe even you have a little bit more of an ability to push that FCS game to a spring kind of a setting, and then not have to play them during the regular season, which obviously would solve that big-time problem right before rivalry weekend where everyone's a little mad that the SEC is playing a ton of FCS teams. Maybe you get that out of the way. During spring, you get to know your team just a little bit better, and you get that paycheck for that smaller school. So a lot of different things going into this. I think we'll probably have to wait until next offseason to see a lot of this go into play, but I think it's a matter of time. I think we will see some teams go at it during spring, and I can't wait for it, if I'm being totally honest. But a lot of different things that we can talk about, obviously, as spring goes on. We'll get into some quarterbacks. We'll get into some freshmen to watch. A lot of different things. And if you have any segments that you'd like to see on the show, please leave a comment. I will break them down next week, of course. But a lot of different things happening around here. I'll probably start doing a couple more short type content, maybe open up a TikTok. So a lot of different things kind of happening on my end over here, trying to build my brand just that little bit more. But anyway, you guys want to comment, if you guys want to call me out for something I said, and we can go back and forth, more than happy to do that. If you have a question about what I think about certain issues, more than happy to talk about that on next show. Would love for one of these segments to just be fan questions. So anything that y'all have, leave them in the comments here. Please like and subscribe. Means the world to me. Would do anything to be in this industry for a very long time, and can't do that without you guys' help. So would love for you guys to like, comment, subscribe, do all of that really fun stuff. But that'll do it for this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. We'll be back next week. We won't take that long hiatus. I'll be honest, got a little bit caught up in March Madness, I won't lie, but at the end of the day, we will be back next weekend. Maybe we'll break down the top 10 teams in college basketball and college football, kind of a combined top 10 next week, because kind of wanted to do that this week, but I'll wait until we're getting into the Final Four, have a little bit more fun to talk about. But we'll talk about that, obviously, next week. Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you same time, same place, right here next week.